Less than 24 hours to go for the parties, for the coalitions, and for the candidates to give them opportunity to win your votes by giving out their promises, their messaging, everything. However, if you look across everything, they all talk about the economy one way or the other. So, Assalamualaikum, Salam Sejahtera. I'm just going to go straight to it. The economic costs of living, education, and everything else, even transportation now, is seen by the people as a very hot trigger for how they live their lives. In order to talk about this, I will be helped by first an economist, Prof. Jomo Kwame Sundaram. Thank you so much, Prof, for making time. I also have Saudara Adli Amirullah, Malaysian Youth Council. He's a fellow there. I was supposed to have Professor Tan Sri Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, but the time difference is in Boston somehow, so it's late at night there. But never mind, we'll continue anyways, and I'm sure Prof. Jomo and Adli has lots to say on this. Before they start, I'm throwing out this statement that if you look around and you Google, you will find that most of the big institutions of the world, like the World Bank, like Barclays, like IMF, they have moved down their forecast for 2023, giving a much more gloomier outlook of economy and economic growth for next year. With that, pervading the global feeling towards 2023, how would the manifestos or the promises given by any candidates or any parties or any coalition for GE15 should sound like to our two panelists? So I'm just gonna start with Jomo first. Prof. Jomo, if you can outlay to us what your thinking is of the challenges of the economy and how the political parties, the political candidates are sort of giving their solution, whether convincingly or not, on solving it for the people of Malaysia. Prof. Jomo.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Kamarul, and good to see you again. The is a very, very challenging situation indeed. Unfortunately, the manifestos do not really address many of the key issues. The key issue, of course, is that we face the prospect of a major world recession. We face the prospect of much slower economic growth, which will eventually mean less demand for our exports, and this will definitely have adverse repercussions for the economy. Unfortunately, factors beyond our control, the war, the pandemic, and so on, have really not helped at all in the last few years. Yes. Unfortunately, during this period, we find that there has been very little attempt to address those issues, and most importantly, the difficulties of higher prices, which have been largely due to the war, and the NATO imposition of economic sanctions, which have caused the price of energy, oil, and also, of course, food to rise. Now, as far as Malaysia is concerned in the medium term, there has been very little significant industrialization for more than 2 decades, since the end of the 1990s. Malaysia has sort of given up on industrialization. It claims to be wanting to develop services, but let's face it, most of the services which are being developed are not exactly high value added services, unless you define them very differently. If you think that Grab driving, for example, or food delivery is high value added and so on. So the problem right now is that the so-called modern services which are being developed are not really helping. Yes. And seem to be increasing. Really, they do not help the Malaysian population. very much in terms of the incomes. So we have a very serious problem, very not unlike that in the United States, where you've had virtually full employment since the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. But yet at the same time, you have what they call the Great Resignation. Many people with jobs who are quitting their jobs because they are lousy jobs, pay very poorly, and so on and so forth, and were demanding better conditions and so on. So we have those kinds of problems which have basically discouraged a lot of young people. A lot of young people feel that the future is very, very uncertain. They don't know what is happening and so on. Because of course, worsens mental stress and things like that.
Yes. Prof, I'm going to come back to you on that, because all that, the macro and then the micro and then the sort of the perfect storm of problems that we have in our country, and then the Undi 18. So I'm going to go to that, because I remember when I was young, I'm sure Prof remember when you were 18 also, and how we look at the world, and we want change. So we have a Youth Council fellow member, Malaysian Youth Council, Saudara Adli. So you've heard what Professor said, and what would your views be on this, Adli?
I think I would like to echo Prof. Jomo's point that the youth is quite frustrated to the extent that there is a lot of instability happening around. But I think that the aspiration of Malaysian youth particularly is always about a better job opportunity on top of a sufficient salary, because we all have been seeing that, for example, my friends, engineer, is still being paid by 2,000 to 3,000 ringgit per month, which is equivalent to like 10 years ago of engineers being paid, right?
Adli, sorry, 2,000 did you say?
Yeah, my friend was
Adli, 2,000 is just 500 more than minimum wage.
Yes,
but an engineer has to go and study overseas or locally 4 years and 5 years, and then has to be qualified and all this stuff.
Correct. So if you are fresh graduate for an engineer, you can get paid as low as 2,000 ringgit. That is very unfortunate.
Wow.
So that begs a very big question, where how can moving forward, how the new government can help to actually push a better salary for the younger people, because at the end of the day, we wouldn't be surprised if a lot of young people went to gig economy, because that's where you can earn about 5,000 ringgit to 6,000 ringgit if you work very hard. So I think that's where the demand and supply come into picture, and how we can nudge into the supply side to actually offer a better salary.
I understand, Adli, but I'm just going to put it into perspective. So you're saying, from your point, some engineers or professional students, young people of Malaysia, went to study, got their degrees and all this stuff, came back, or they're still here, work in the professional white collar so-called jobs, and earning between 2,000 to maybe 3,000 for the first, second, third year, when a gig economy worker who starts, start their car in the morning and work maybe 12 hours a day for maybe 6 days out of 7 days, could probably get from 2,000 to 5,000 ringgit. Is that what we're looking at right now?
Yes. So I think that's the dilemma of most of the youth is facing.
Since that's the point, so I'm going to dissect the manifestos now, because none of the manifestos really put that urgency that way. It's sort of very macro. And like Prof. Jomo said, they don't really delve into the structural issues that's plaguing our economy. Not all the way back to what Prof. Jomo started in saying, that nearly since the 1990s, we have sort of forgone the industrial side of things and look more at services. But services that are not high up the value chain, but more like, sending food, moving people. Not that these are demeaning jobs, but we also talk about the fourth industrial revolution. Maybe Prof. Jomo have a different definition for 4IR, but generally we want to go to the highly skilled and very technical, technology-based skills. So I'm going to go back to Prof. Jomo on this. Prof. Jomo, if I look at all the main three coalitions and their promises in their manifestos, I don't see that big structural changes being promised. We know you can't do that in a year, but if you want 5 years, shouldn't that be a must to be included, Prof. Jomo?
Yes, you're certainly correct about the absence of these issues in the manifesto. But this, let's face it, manifestos are basically to punching undi,
Okay.
to get votes. So we don't expect too much from manifestos in that sense. But at the same time, I think there have been many statements by the different interests involved, by the different leaders involved, which gives some indication of what they are promising. The caretaker prime minister promises more of the same, and Tan Sri Mahyudin promises something more of his period. It's
Okay.
not clear what that it basically implies, but it's a version of more of the same.
Yes.
And of course, Anwar Ibrahim has his own take on things, which is
Yeah.
much more
Yeah. Prof, sorry to
ambitious
cut
than what in
you,
the
but
manifesto.
Tan Sri Muhyiddin
I
is
think
a
what is in the
Perikatan National,
manifesto.
and Perikatan National's manifesto promises to create 1 million high-paying jobs in digital economy in 5 years.
Yeah, I mean that's very easy to say. Let's
Yeah.
face it. You can
Yes.
you can superficially digitize almost everything, right?
Yeah.
What you are doing, what we are doing right now is considered a part of the digital economy, and you
Correct.
can do all kinds of things. All the Grab services are all digital, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So you can redefine digital, but that doesn't mean anything in
Okay.
terms of the value added, which is what you correctly emphasized. I think the other thing which worries me a great deal is that the manifestos, especially the BN manifesto, offers to top up the incomes of everybody to a certain level. And this is incredible because you have before the election a budget which was announced, which was
Yes.
more handouts, much very generous, more handouts, and reduction of taxes. So who's going to pay for this? Okay, basically, it means that you pay for it by borrowing more. What does that mean? That means the younger people will have to pay for our
More.
consumption in the future. Now, we have already taken away what is being put aside for the younger people by, for example, using the Kwan money, which was supposed to be because the future generations will not have access to mineral resources such as oil and gas. Money is put aside for them in Kwan. They will no longer have access to that. So here we are spending away, and basically passing the buck to the future generations about
Yep.
small amounts. Besides the government budget
Yes.
deficit, there are also about 200 plus billion, which has been borrowed by the so-called GLCs. Okay, and you just take, for example, ECRL. The original ECRL contract was supposed to involve it cost 81 billion,
Yeah.
but the actual debt reservicing required was over 110 billion just for
Okay.
ECRL.
Okay.
And and then you have 1 MDB, of course, which is also a huge amount of money.
Yes.
And there's no time to go through all the other things. Now, those things are borrowed off the books. They're not even discussed in Parliament. The
Prof,
Ketua Audit
for the
has got
sake
that.
of people
They
like
got that,
me who not be
but
so
it's not part
clever,
of
can
his
we
job.
just delve a bit on the definition of the books and things that are presented right there in the Dewan for us to debate and question?
Well, basically, what I mean by off the books is that they are what are considered, they're not part of the public accounts. Okay, they're
Correct.
not part of the government accounts in the sense that they are supposedly debt incurred by government-linked companies, which are government guaranteed. Which
Yeah.
basically means the riot has to pay for them eventually at some point in the future.
Yes.
Okay, that's basically what it means. Let's face it. For example, the biggest borrower, besides the two I mentioned earlier, is Dana Infra. Okay? Now, if you look at some of the Dana Infra projects, do you expect any of them to pay for themselves? Unfortunately, no.
No.
They're not going to pay for themselves. I'm not against infrastructure construction, but let's face it. A lot of the stuff which is going on right now is basically creating jobs for the boys, and you know which boys I'm referring to. And we have
Okay.
a situation where we are, in a sense, condemning Adli and his generation,
Yeah.
who will have to pay, well into the future, not only for what is called government debt, but also for government guaranteed debt. 1MDB loans are not going to run away, go
Yeah.
away. ECRL loans are not going to go away. They're going to have to be paid for. And how many people are going to write ECRL to come to KL?
Okay.
Or to go to Putrajaya and Port Klang.
Yeah. Prof, this
So
criticism has
we
cropped
have
up
been
before,
limiting ourselves.
but then the powers that be it those in charge of finance or otherwise, they say, oh, but other countries has high government debt also, and they are okay. What would you say to that?
The point I'm trying to make is that the debt levels have gone up incredibly. First, you remember when Dato Sri Najib became finance minister after the 2008 elections, he promised to set a debt level. Within years, it was breached, and then set another level, also breached, and then the current finance minister raised it again. Okay, so I mean, what's the point of having a debt limit if you just keep on breaching it? But that's just government debt. It does not deal with the fact that the government guaranteed debt is not subject to public scrutiny. We do not discuss that. Almost nobody discusses that. And this is part of the problem which we have. So even the governance arrangements which we have in Parliament are very, very limited.
Okay, true. So, Adli, I remember, I'm quite an old journalist. I remember years ago, the young people of Japan voiced their dissatisfaction so much that it influenced sort of a tsunami in their political election, because they say they refused to pay for the aging society of Japan. Because Japan has a huge aging society, and the government is taxing the young people and saying that this money cannot go to do this because we've got to look at the elderly and all those stuff. But that's not something that you do in one generation. The preparation should have been in the years before when you were making heyday. So what Prof. Jomo is saying, and Japan is in many ways, they have a lot more capacity than us. So I'm just asking you, Ali, since Prof made me feel old because he said Adli's generation below. So what are your generation going to do about all this? Because on one hand, I understand, because the off books, the everything is not very transparent. So people see more, hey, we're getting handouts, we're getting cash, we're getting stuff, we're getting laptops for our studies in university and all that. But is it a poison chalice that we're getting now and we're going to pay with an arm and leg in the future? Do the younger generation see this across the board for many of them, Adli?
Yeah, so I think first we really need to not underestimate the intellectual of the youth to understanding about the political landscape of Malaysian economy. I think we all have been blindsided to see our Undi 18 is as a kid that do not understand what is happening to the country. I mean, that is the narrative that at least most of the boomers looking at us, right? But I think there is a big portion of us is understand the importance of having a good institutional reform, for example, and a good economic reform to begin with. So, like for example, I can say that whoever win this election, it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, any party that coming into the government now will have to face a very huge challenge, which is a potential of austerity measure. Because let's face the fact that Malaysian government do not have money, because we don't have enough funds that have been to help improve all of our infrastructure and all of our potential reform. But I think what more important to the youth is actually the long term game, which is we call it, what is the stability that we are looking for. So I think at least for the youth, they are really wanted a real institution reform. So whoever come in power next, the check and balance system is there, so that it can allow the government of the day to focus on the real
point taken, Adli. But I haven't given you the chance for you to critique all the economic promises in all the manifestos that you have seen. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we can all look into the numbers of 1 million jobs and whatnot, yada yada. But I think what really important is how the youth can actually get into the pictures of let's say decision making, or maybe in parliamentary. Do we have enough youth voices in there? As you can see, the oldest MPs that is getting into the election is at the age of 96. But then again, the youth is let's say we take at the age of below 35. So I
Okay.
think the important is, do we have enough youth voices in the parliament to always bring youth problem in there?
Yeah.
And also, I think if we have that, then we can talk about what is the real changes. Because I wouldn't want to go through or scrutinize what are the promises that they made,
Okay.
because I feel like when the government came into the power, we should not treat the manifesto as a quote unquote as a Bible. But I think at the same time, it is important for them to realize the importance of youth, given the fact that we have 5 million new voters coming from the 18 itself, right? So yeah.
Adli, on the sideline, I'm going to give your number to my guest yesterday called Datuk Dr. Rais, because he said it's not just a Bible, it's a Quran. And he said that to Tun M during the PhDs. But put that aside, my next question to Prof. Jomo is, we talk about the government debt, but we have also, wouldn't we have to look at things like household debt? How much cash in hand would an average Malaysian, according to economic and communities grouping, have? Prof. Yomo?
Thank you, Kamarul. I'm sorry I have to take issue with Adli. I don't think the checks and balances are
Go
in
ahead.
place.
Yeah.
In fact, what we have right now, the only checks and balances most politicians are interested in are the checks and the bank balance, bank checks and bank
Yes,
balances.
yes,
Okay,
bro. I think the important
let's
we need that reform to have
yeah.
that check and balance. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
Okay.
and while you and and many of your colleagues in FBM and elsewhere are very aware, I'm afraid a lot of people, once you get, for example, into social media, basically it's an echo chamber. Okay, if they know you're interested in something, they will keep on feeding you more and more material of that type. It's not necessarily the case that young people are necessarily more critically aware of many of these issues. But I appreciate your sentiment.
Okay.
I
Fair enough.
do appreciate the young people are much more skeptical and so on and so forth. But let me go back to the question Sheikh Kamarul asked.
Sure.
And this is a basic question of household debt. Household debt, unfortunately, has been accumulating, but has been seen by many as a sign of great success on Malaysia, of financial inclusion. Okay, households in Malaysia, more than 80% of households in Malaysia are in debt, heavily in debt.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, more than 75%. Sorry, more than 75%. They are heavily in debt. And their debt is more than 80% of their income.
Okay. So what do we do, Prof?
So my colleagues, for example, have said that this categorization of B40 and all that is nonsense. There were 70% of the population in Malaysia do not have enough incomes to save.
So it's B70, Prof.
Sorry?
Going by that, it's B70. 70% doesn't have enough.
Yeah, that was 2019, okay, before the pandemic. So you might have to revise the figures upwards, okay? But yeah, you're right. They suggest B70. Now, if you and of the B70, the bottom 20% don't even have enough to survive, to eat.
Yes.
Okay? So to say that only 4% of the population is poor and so on and so forth is deluding ourselves. Because when I was growing up, most people live in the countryside,
yes,
and most people grew food around the house.
Agreed.
Today, how many people do that? You cannot do that in an urban flat and so on and so forth. So the possibility of additional food coming in through your own efforts is simply not there. So the result is that we are a fairly underfed, undernourished population for the poorest people.
Yeah.
The fact that there are many people who eat badly, eat too much, and so on is a slightly different problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So this indebtedness is very great, and now the captains of finance are devising new ways and means by which you can have debt intergenerationally. For example, there is a proposal now, you borrow the money, you borrow to buy, let us say, a flat or a house, and you pay over a period of about 40 years. So in case, so for example, I take such a loan, if anything happens to me, my waris, my children and so on, will inherit that debt instead of inheriting my harta, they inherit my
Yeah.
debt. These are the schemes which are coming up all the time. And many of us are buying things on a staggered payment basis. And very often we end up paying almost as much as twice the actual cost of those things, simply because we cannot afford to pay for everything all at once. So and when you have an extraordinary event such as the pandemic, people lose incomes, that basically puts people into debt, into huge, they get into really serious trouble because they have so many debt obligations. And thankfully, we don't have too much of this here. But in India, for example, farmers who have gone into such debt, there have been more than 300,000 who have committed suicide, close to 400,000 now, in fact, who have
Yeah.
committed suicide simply because the debt is personal to the farmer. So
Yes.
if the farmer dies, that debt is not transferred to the family. But in this case, as far as the housing loans are concerned, this is being suggested to transfer that it will involve the next generation as well. So
Yeah.
you can imagine what the implications are. We are a truly indebted nation, not only at the international level or at the national level, which you correctly highlighted, at the fiscal level, but also at the household level. And
Okay.
unfortunately, the people who businesses, for example, often have very little access to credit, especially if you're a small enterprise.
Yeah. Adli, I'm going to give you the right of reply, but I'm just not that I'm helping Adli, but I have undi 18 in my household. Actually, by theory, 3 of them should be able all to vote. But the 18 years old, he just celebrated his birthday in October. Now he keep on questioning me because isn't it an automatic registration? Why is it only until August that is accepted? I'm in October and voting is in November. So young people will just see it from the right point of view. The other one, which is a few years older, is studying hard, and it's so hard to study, has to go and study that overseas. The sample post never arrived, and yesterday was the final deadline to send it back to Malaysia. So while you say undi 18, I'm going to also put that thing because bureaucratically, would every one of them be empowered? Kalau sampul tak sampai, dia nak undi macam mana? Itu tak apa. Itu selingan. But I do see both sides. I agree with Prof on the echo chamber, but I do know there's a rising, compared to my generation, rising numbers of young people so mature at the age of 18 because they read a lot online, they see videos and stuff like that. So I'm going to sit in the middle on that. But my question next to Atli is, do you see the younger candidates fighting and advocating these causes? Because that's what we expect. Even I, who's not young anymore, I expect muda to be fighting things like what Prof. Jomo has been said. Because why do you saddle me with, that's from decisions that I'm not even born into, for example. And that's so irresponsible. If I'm a young person at 18, I'll be saying it like that. But do you see that being espoused by the parties, the candidates, or the coalitions claiming to represent young people? Adli.
Yeah, I think thank you. It's actually a very good question. I think first we also need to accept the hard fact that our political climate is still identity politic, where they play around religion, races, and sentiment. So I think that is very unfortunate. I think for the youth, at least most of the youth, for them it doesn't matter who you are. For them, what matters is how we can improve as a country, right? But again, it's hard to say because when a younger politician trying to go up the ladders in each political party, it's always being I would say not stopped but being hindered by the older political leaders, right?
Okay.
So that begs the question how much influence that they can be when it comes to decision making or when it comes to influencing the decision making. So I think that is again a problem that cannot be solved in the daylight
True.
or one day. But for me, it's a uh, there's a hope lah, ada harapan lah sedikit bila kita tengok lagi there is more younger politician coming up, there is more younger voice voicing out, so that is at least for me is a good progress.
Okay.
But for sure there is a lot of gap
Okay.
to be filled.
Adli, I'm gonna give you a chance here. Okay, name me sinar-sinar harapan ini, kerana saya berada di Sinar sekarang. Name me the glimmering lights of hope of youth representation by those who you see. Because the reason we do this show is also to help the voters to decide, including the Undi 18. So we want to delve into things. So maybe you can share with them, because through your youth council, you do meet a lot of activism, initiatives being done by the young, and young leaders usually associate themselves with this. So from that background, please share with us the hope that you have seen. I mean, specific to maybe individuals, groups, or even causes.
I see. I think I will prepare myself to name names because of I don't feel comfortable to do.
Yeah, they have to vote pangkah nama, Adli. Come on.
yes. But again, I mean, for me, if a youth always look into leadership matters, because there is a survey made lately in ASIA's Yusuf Institute where they surveyed a lot of youth what they look into a political party. They always look into leadership as a main factors. So I think that is a role where you have a very strong voice when it comes to voicing out issues, or you have a stance, or you have a position when it comes to let's say inflation or maybe unemployment. So the kind of good young leader is always have a position, and they are not being beating around the bush. They have a position, they know what to do, and they know what is the next step.
Fair enough. So I have to go and wrap up this first block, and we go for a short break. But once we are back, I also want to look to the future. Prof and Adli, sometimes it's not fair in the discussion to just look at the gloom and doom. What are the silver linings? And that's why I started with Adli just now on the Sinar. I'm going to force you guys to pick out the hope out there. For example, if we say that, let's say a new coalition goes up, and we're going to argue with them that, hey, bring back the mind of industrialization. What kind of industrialization? Where do we start? Because I remember moderating Prof in one of the forums locally, and Prof made the point that why don't we look at rubber? You want to do cars, there are many thousand parts that you have to master and to do and whatever. But if you look at, deciphering already the genome of rubber, and then where do we use it for? And we already have this. So that kind of discussion to look at the hope, and then we'll tie it back to GE15 right after this short break. I'm back. Hi, my name is Cam, or Kamaru Barim bin Harun, and I've been off the media for a while. But I have to be back because you requested it, and this is the mother of all elections, they say, General Election 15. Now, what is it going to be like? We must ask the questions, because general election is not about the candidates or the leaders. It's basically about us and how we want our lives to be better. And we have so many challenges. So let's take a very, very deep look at GE15, ask the most serious of questions to the most serious of candidates, and that will help you make up your mind. What kind of lives would ourselves, our family, and our nation have post GE15? I'm here to help you. I will ask the questions. You can make up your mind better for voting on D-Day, and then you, me, all of us can have a better Malaysia, a better nation by making the best decision, the best informed decision for GE15 right here on Sinar Harian and Sinar Daily. Thank you for still staying with us. It's a public holiday tomorrow to facilitate us voting. And just for those of you going to prayers, we just a bit more so that we can pray for the right things and to give us guidance for the right vote tomorrow. But for those of you chilling and having lunch, we in the first block discussed that next year it looks gloomier for the economic outlook and forecast. Barclays, for example, revised downwards their global economic growth forecast to 1.7%. IMF reduced them to 2.7%. And that's the challenge. Whoever forms government need to not only tackle domestic issues, but also global weaving of where and what we want to do vis-a-vis the gloomy outlook. So I'm going to go back to Prof. Jomo now, and I'm going to make Prof. Jomo please give us what are the silver linings to look at, because we do have resources, maybe not maximum, but we do have great people in thinking. We do have great research. And what do we need to do, Prof, to really start or kickstart or reset or whatever it is that will put us back on the right trajectory?
Thank you, Kamarul. I think there are many things to be done, and rather than give you a long laundry list of what needs to be done, many things are well known and everybody agrees on them, except that very little is actually done to try to, because, industrialization is not something you do and overnight immediately get political support for, right? There's very little incentive to go to invest and to make the necessary effort to industrialize and progress. But two things have happened which have been very, very good for us. As you know, that ASEAN is still committed to ZOP, the Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality. And because of the raging Cold War between the US and China, and the US allies have basically been ganging up against China to withdraw their investments from China and so on. Many of them are coming to looking for alternative sites. And the amount of investment interest, for example, in Penang, in the last year, the investment interest is about 8 times, equivalent of the 8 previous years, added together. Okay, that shows you the level of interest. Now, many of these so-called interest in investments may not materialize, but it basically shows you that many firms, US firms, Japanese firms, but also other firms are very, very worried if that they are seen to be sourcing from China, they will get into trouble if the Cold War heats up. So we should not, of course, cut off our relations with China, because it is our major trading partner and a very major investor in Malaysia and so on and so forth. We get very concessional loans from them and so on. But this is where ZOP becomes important, of being non-aligned and using it actively. Right now, for example, with all this rhetoric during the pandemic about a whole of government approach.
Yeah.
What is the manifestation of whole of government approach, even for the pandemic? But let's face it, for other things, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. When the government used to have a supplementary feeding program, they don't run by the education ministry, the health ministry is not consulted, food which is not really very nutritious is given out, and so on and so forth. To be fair, Mazli tried to change this, but he never had the chance to do so, and had to resign from on. But the point is this, that we have an opportunity, that there are sometimes open goals, which are presented to us. Malaysia is now the number 2 or number 3 producer of photovoltaic solar panels. Okay. But unlike number 1 is China, about 71%. Number 2 or number 3, together with Malaysia, is Korea with about 7+%. But almost all the Korean and the Chinese panels are produced by Chinese companies or Korean companies. In Malaysia, there's only one major Malaysian company producing those solar panels. And let's face it, it's not a very, very canggih, very complex technology. Okay, if you ask any engineers about it, they will tell you that there are less than 200 parts compared to 4,000 parts for a proton, and so on and so forth. So we have open goals, but if you do not have a leadership, a political leadership, which sees the need to work together as a government, which sees the need to have a good and healthy opposition to ensure that there are the checks and balances which Adli talked about. If we do not have that, then we are basically doomed from the outset. We are not going to make the needed progress and so on. And this is the unfortunate thing which we have. We have a few, we didn't really work for the durian runtuh of all this investment interest in Malaysia, but it happened. But we don't know how to take advantage of it. Right now it's investment interest, investment proposals. They are not secured yet. And we really need to work doubly hard to ensure that. The fact that Penang, for example, is held by an opposition government should not be for the federal government to pretend it doesn't exist.
Prof, on that note, I know Penang is very dear to you, it's very dear to me too. But why can't what happened in Penang in early 70s, that foresight to look at E&E back then and really change the game? Or am I reading it wrongly, Prof? Why can't we do a similar move like what happened in the early 70s for E&E and Penang? Again, for another industry.
Well, Kamarul, I've been arguing this for decades. Okay, so
just for the benefit of the Undi 18, Prof, give us back the story.
Yeah, you can do this for rubber, and in fact, some of it has already happened with the increase in the manufacture of rubber gloves and condoms and whatnot. You can do this with palm oil. With a lot of products, but these are the established products. There are a whole range of other products which have been which Malaysia produces, where you can add greater value from that. But you need a strong research effort, which is government supported, because no company is going to do it for you. And then you need a nimble government, a government which is agile, which sees the opportunities and knows how to seize these opportunities, to build on these opportunities. But if you have a government where you appoint people mainly because of their know-who rather than their know-how, and if you appoint people because because of their loyalty, their perceived loyalty, then we're not going to go anywhere. Okay. But this,
in that sense, just a short one before I go to Adli.
Sorry?
So for you, the posts in the cabinet, the traditional posts like Minister of Finance, EPU, and let's say MITI, this must be the top best expert that Malaysia has and really want to sacrifice their career for the nation to kickstart our revival for maybe, the future. This must be the criteria of people selected. But that's our wish list. The reality and the real politics is whoever, if they even manage to get 112 or cross 112 seats in Dewan Rakyat, they're going to look at it as the spoils of war. They're going to see who supported me that gets me to this 112 number, for example, and okay, I have to reward this guy, and that guy. Wouldn't that be the reality? Prof?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking Adli the question.
No. I'm going to Adli, but I just want that quick from you.
That's the unfortunate reality, but it doesn't have to be the case. If you look at what happened in neighboring Thailand about 30 years ago, after the election, they actually changed the constitution. They changed the constitution to have a government where the prime minister was basically the chief executive of the country. And basically, they appointed people who were in the cabinet were not in parliament. They were not in parliament. They were not in business. Okay. Now, this is usually associated with presidential systems. Yes. Okay, but there are many instances in the world. Thailand was not the first, and certainly is not the last, where you can basically change the system to have much more of that. but you basically have to get away from the problem of political financing. You have to address the problem of political financing,
Yes.
and the problem of financing requires this kind of what you refer to as warlordism.
Okay.
Okay, and I actually wrote an article years ago about this, but unfortunately nobody pays attention.
Okay.
So
Let's see if Adli and Malaysian Youth Council looks at it. Adli, a lot we have been saying with Prof. Jomo over the last 5 minutes. Your input into them.
Yeah, I think Prof. Jomo covered quite comprehensively on the economic reform that we require, right? But I think let me take this platform as an opportunity to emphasize the importance of institutional reform, like to echo Prof. Jomo point on political funding, because at the end of the day, we have to admit that having the right or the critical institutional reform will help our country to move to the right direction. So there are few things that we need to address when the new government coming in. First, political funding. Second, public procurement reform. Third, MSCC independent. Fourth, police accountability. Fifth, parliamentary select committee empowerment. And the final one is to limit the serving term for PM and MPs. So I think having at least these 7 or 6 institutional reform will definitely help our country to move in a better and right direction, because I feel like we can talk all the numbers, all the economic problem of what we want to solve, but if at the back end the reform is not being made, then it just won't work that way. So yeah.
Okay, Adli, I'm all for institutional reform, and I'm sure many Malaysians are too. However, we do acknowledge that these things, this amalgamation of forces between politics and economy and market and parties, these are powerful groupings, are powerful alliances. How do you reform when stability, there might not be an outright winner on their own? For GE15, they might have to do coalition, for example, a lot of horse trading, facing up to this power. And some even say the underground economy in Malaysia is so huge that it even surpasses the value of the real economy. Of course, that's, WhatsApp talk and chat rooms and whatever. But I'm just painting it to you that, like the scams, we're still fighting them until now. And they use everything. Their messaging is way better than certain candidates and political parties. So I'm going to throw that back to you. How do we do this reform?
Yeah, I think it comes back to our politician. Do they have can they put their ego aside to think about the country first? I mean, that's very difficult for some of them. But again, I think I would like to quote one of the right movement when we have back in Pakatan Harapan days, where there is an establishment of parliamentary select committee. We can see in the PSC itself, there is not only Pakatan Harapan government in that particular list. We can see a lot of some of the opposition during that time was also in the committee. So I think it boils down to the leadership of the coalition. Do they have enough guts to put their ego aside and to really think about the country first and do all these necessary institutional reform? Because we just don't want the next YNDB to surfacing again, because we just have had enough, I would say.
Okay, I get your point, Lee. I'm going to give this back to Prof. Jomo. Sorry to do this to you, Prof. But I'm going to take an example of Norway. Like us, they also have oil and gas. But the way they manage the oil and gas proceeds, over time, they're one of the best sovereign wealth funds in the world, using that war chest that they got from the oil and gas. And they have a system, a very transparent one, that links that ability of the money that they have accumulated through reinvestment and everything else to each and every person of their citizen. Now, so my question to you is, the reform that Adli was saying about cannot just be looking at 1, 2, or 3, a particular institution, but it must be a structural one, because if, for example, Petronas is the favorite piggy bank for any political forces that go up there and take power, then what reform are we going to talk about? So the reform must be across many things: laws, political financing, yeah, you said, and everything else. Prof?
Thank you. I think you're absolutely correct that Petronas could have been very different. And to be fair, Petronas started off being quite different. In the late 1970s, I was a very young lecturer. I helped to organize a conference at UKM, and we invited various people, including the man who became chief economist of Statoil in Norway.
Wow.
And basically, they discussed with, at that time, the MD of Petronas, Dato' Rastam Hadi, the late Dato' Rastam Hadi, about how to develop Petronas, the checks and balances. Remember that Petronas was created around the same time Pertamina in Indonesia went bankrupt. They went bankrupt at a time when oil prices were at an all-time high. So it was a really very, very strange situation. So it was very important, and to Dato' Rastam's credit, he tried to do many things. A lot of institutional effort was put into ensuring minimal abuse and so on and so forth. Well, of course, unfortunately, many things happened since then, and Pertamina, but I think Tan Sri Hassan Marikan, for example, did try to put things on track as the MD of Petronas. But having said that, I think Adli is absolutely correct. I mean, that checklist he read out is a very good checklist. But obviously, what one of the things I was suggesting, for example, this whole question of government guaranteed foreign debt is something which is obviously not in that list. So we need a longer list than that. But I cannot but agree with Adli's approach. That you really need that kind of institution. How is that going to come about? I think, unfortunately, we are probably going to see a hung parliament. We are probably going to see a coalition of coalitions, a grand coalition, so to speak. And the question then becomes, is who in this horse trading, who will basically push for these kinds of reforms? And this is why, it's very important for you, Kem, and Adli and others, to actually voice it out. I mean, it's very unfortunate that, for example, Tan Sri Azlan, who was supposed to join us today, pulled out because he just attacked many professors in the country for signing a position paper. I mean, is endorsing the government of the day, as he has been doing for many years, acceptable? But when somebody suggests, when people endorse a change, that becomes unacceptable. I think we really have to think a great deal about what is correct and what is wrong and what is unfair and so on and so forth. So we really need to have single standards rather than double standards if we are going to reform.
I get you, Prof. Adli?
Good.
Before we close, Adli?
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't add much. I think for at least for youth, we want to see the real reform, institutional reform changes, because that is what will make our country move to the right direction. Because I think that is very crucial. And please do your own homework to see which coalition promise the best institutional reform and make the right decision.
Adli, I only have 2 exclamation marks for you. Ooh-ha, amen to that. Prof. Jomo, you always make us think, and you weave the history and the current, and you make us think about the future. I thank you all the time for that. And I thank all the audience for watching in. And I want to leave with, I just want to know, from a political economy point of view, how do you move my industry, the communication and media industry? Because like Prof. Jomo said, the regulations, the fairness, the justice, the openness, and the transparency. What about political ownership? What about the non-direct ownership? What about the direct ownership of the media? All this and more is symptomatic of where Malaysia is. I believe that I can be as good as any journalist in the world, but would my country help and facilitate me to be so? Is the question that we all going to ask for ourselves, our profession, our family, and our community going forward to the ballot box tomorrow. Thank you so much, Prof. Jomo. Thank you so much, Adli. Good night to Professor Tan Sri in Boston. I'm so sorry that we couldn't get you, but we'll get you another time. Thank you. This is the last lap. Let's speed towards our destination. Goodbye.